All right, Mr. Chair, you can call the meeting to order.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. It looks like we have a full quorum. And so, uh, first of all, Jim, would you just issue the usual peremptory remarks that you make about recording and what you're doing?
Sure, this is the Tri-Town Board of Health meeting, December 19th, 2024, 6 p.m. This meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be made available on CTSB and other worldwide web locations. If people in the room do not choose to be recorded or audio recorded, they may leave the meeting if they so choose.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, so the next order of business is to approve the September 25th, 2024 meeting minutes. We have them. Does everyone have a copy of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Would anyone like to make any corrections or changes in it, or would we have a motion to approve the minutes as they are?
So moved. Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So the minutes have been approved. The next order of business is the proposal for the FY26 Tri-Town Health Department budget. And Jim Willis, the director of the department, will present that. Jim?
Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that time of year again. We'll go through the budget. I did send some slight tweaks today,
Mm-hmm.
possibly yesterday. It's nothing really earth shattering, but just it's a work in progress. So I'll go through the budget, the proposal, the revenue, accomplishments, collaborative, and priorities and beyond. So this budget, we'll get to the numbers in a second, does incorporate cost of living staff increases. We have 4 full-time equivalents. It's Zach, myself, Ellie, and John for Tri-Town. This is the Tri-Town budget. The collaborative is totally separate. You will see an increase in compensation reserve. Compensation reserve line item incorporates cost of living, longevity, and all those other things. And you will see, in the finance committee will see that line item with a significant increase in that line item. Reason being is because we didn't budget for cost of living last fiscal year, the current fiscal year you're in. If the board recalls, we made some significant salary adjustments to get the staff into a competitive situation. And we didn't incorporate cost of living because there were salary increases. So the cost of living was at 0. And so when you look at cost of living for FY26, you'll see a significant jump. I'm not worried about that. If that question does come up, I'll deal with it. Again, fringe, I do anticipate insurance going up possibly 10 to 12%. Don't know that number yet. We are still under Lee's fiscal host, and Lee provides the fringe benefits. So right now it's sort of like a number that's sort of there. It does incorporate the retirement assessments with the potential cost of living. We did budget between 3 and 3.5% cost of living. We got to try to stay competitive, because if we don't, we'll be in the same position 4 or 5 years down the road again. So again, the fringe benefits will change. And if the insurance goes up another 10 to 12%, it'll make our budget look really high. But again, like any little shift in the Tri-Town budget's going to show a significant increase, because we're just one department out of a grand scheme of other departments in the town. Lab and other line items are just up slightly. The internet, every inspector now has a tablet with cellular service. We need to have that for our inspections to go live. Lab supplies for a laboratory, everything's sort of adjusting up a little bit. And web permitting is not much. They try to go up every 2 or 3% a year to do all that. Since we're moving, which we'll get into, The rent is going to go up a little bit in Stockbridge, and bookkeeping is going to go up a little bit. Lee charges the district bookkeeping because they process our invoices, payroll, they handle our money, the turnovers, etc. Rent has always been the same for like 20 years. And moving from Tri-Town in the next couple of weeks to Stockbridge, we did adjust the rent up slightly because we are taking over a little bit of square footage. We're currently still at the same financial paradigm. You know, we are seeing some growth in Lee, but not enough yet to move all those numbers around. We'll take a deep dive the following fiscal year. You know, so it'll be interesting to see where it is. It's been pretty much the same the last 7, 8 years when we made the change. And again, if the board recalls, we did make those permit fees adjustment for the permits, which go effective January, and we do project about a $35,000 to $40,000 in addition to our current revenue. This year we are going to ask each town for a capital request. The reason why we're doing that is so Tri-Town's been in that building for a long time, and we had about 90 years worth of archived records, which we don't have room to take with us. And so I've been able to secure some outside funds, and we've digitized about 3/4 of our files, you know, the housing, the food service, the dump information, just years and years of accumulated files that are still relatively important for the residents, you know, locations of septic components and just a lot of stuff. And so now that we've digitized all that, we've destroyed all those records. I still have the really old archives from like the 1920s, which I'll keep, and it's really important things. It's really fascinating stuff that we're not going to destroy. But there's still about another 25% that we still need. The company has already taken it, and they're storing it for us for free until we can get the rest of the money. We're gonna need some resources, and it's a one-time cost, so we don't want to throw that into the operating budget, then take it away the following fiscal year. So I've already gotten those quotes, and it's around 15 grand. So I'll work with those towns. These numbers for the capital is nothing to do with our Tri-Town operating budget, but I want to just highlight to the board, we will be sending this request to each town to help cover that. With that said, there's an opportunity to write a grant called a Community Compact IT grant that the state puts out under, I think, the Department of Local Services. We have to find a lead town. We're going to try to find grant funding for this. And if we're not successful, we will ask for that capital request.
Okay.
And then moving costs. So we've figured about 50 something $1,000 for moving costs, give or take. That includes movers. We had to hire a company to build out the offices, which are almost complete. They should be done Monday, and IT stuff. And so the 3 town managers are working together to deal with that. So basically, since Lee has I think a 30 million bond for the new public safety building, and we had such a short timeline to move, Lee is going to sort of front those costs, and then going into next town meeting, we'll reconcile whatever Lenox and Stockbridge owes, and the town managers are going to work all that out. Any questions so far on that?
Nope.
So this is sort of like the condensed version that Lee works with. And so basically, we level funded the salaries full time at 355.5. The reason why we do that, folks, is we put all our pay raises into the compensation reserve line item. So when town meeting passes, we then move that money up to the salaries. So it just kind of breaks down for everybody what what longevity looks like, what the pay raises look like. Nursing's fine. We did raise up communications from 4,000 to 4,500, up to 5,340 line on communications. to sort of have enough resources to pay for, the Spectrum bill, the internet, the copier, and things like that. It's not a significant ask. Um, you will see that I did skip over the fringe benefits. So it's around 19,000 for fringe. That doesn't include the potential increase in health insurance, by the way. So that could go up to 20, 30,000, which could really push the budget up. But we're not the only department going through that. And again, we only have 2 employees out of 4 that even take health insurance. So there, I guess you can make an argument that there's some savings there, but like I don't get insurance, and like so we're pretty lucky that the fringe is where it needs to be. It could be significant if we had 4 people like on a family plan. So we're, it is what it is. We can't control benefits. Let's see, the lab's up a little bit. Um, the bookkeeping, we did increase the bookkeeping a little bit, to be fair, since the rent's gonna go up a little bit. Lee does a lot for us. Lee has been very good to Tri-Town. We've between Tri-Town and the collaborative and our grant programs, we send a lot of administrative foot traffic over there, and they process a lot of stuff for us. Zach can chime in if he wants, but there's a lot of stuff going on processing Tri-Town business. So it's to be fair, the bookkeeping is up a little bit. And then compensation reserve, which includes the longevity and cost of living. So I'll skip to the next page so you can see all
Jim?
3. Yes.
Jim, while you're right there, I'm not familiar with the term compensation reserve. Is that money that gets voted on and allocated, but is kind of like in a different account?
No.
Or why
So
isn't it just in up above? If you already know it, why isn't it in salaries and fringe and total personnel costs? It's
good.
new to me that you do
Yeah.
this.
So when Chris Ketchen was the shared town manager back when, all 3 2 town managers, because he was shared with 2. The 2 town managers asked us to create a new line item showing the salary increases. Now, there's no slush fund in compensation so the town of Lee themselves have a compensation reserve account that kind of gets built up over time for unforeseen circumstances, vacancies, etc. The Tri-Town compensation reserve is not set up that way. Whatever we put in for compensation reserve gets put into salaries. It's a really good question, Bob. That's what the towns asked for because they wanted to see like where they wanted to see the
Okay.
breakdown. And since we switched it like 3 or 4 years ago, we just continued to move forward. To me, it doesn't really make a difference. For 20 something years, I've been used to putting all the increases
All up above.
all above. But
Yeah.
again, like one can argue that cost of living increases is not a foregone conclusion. You know what I mean? But what are you
Yeah.
going to do? Give 2 people cost of living and the other 2 none? You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But
Well,
it does.
yeah, part of my reason for asking is I wondered if this rolled over, for instance, if it was
doesn't.
separated as a line item because it behaved differently than the salary and fringe, the total personnel costs above which have to be dispersed in that time frame or sent back.
Yeah, it doesn't get rolled over.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Jim, could I ask a question, Jim, in regard to that? Can you give us an example of something last year where you used the funds in the compensation reserve to pay for something?
So what happens is the compensation reserve is a combination of cost of living for everybody. We calculate current salaries, then we calculate whatever the increase is, like 3.5%. Then each person, depending on how long they've been working there, gets longevity. So basically, once the new fiscal year happens, we take all that money, we put it into the salaries to cover cost of living. And then when Zach hits his milestone at a certain time in the fiscal year, he gets a stipend for longevity. I hit a certain milestone, I get longevity. There's nothing left in it after the fact, unless like someone decides to leave, if one of my inspectors leaves, right, by in July, and we hire someone brand new, there's going to be $1,000 left over in there because that new person doesn't get longevity, for example. And then if we don't spend the money, it goes back to the towns.
Okay.
Yeah. Any unspent money in the tri-town budget goes back to the towns as free cash, obviously, once it gets certified.
Jim, is this an okay time to ask a question related to another place on the spreadsheet?
Absolutely, ask.
I have I saw that the nursing salary went from about 37 to 30. I've been impressed with their work and with what they've got accomplished. And unless somehow you got them to work for less money or maybe work for free part-time or something, I would like that explained.
Absolutely. So the public health nursing line item is not salaries. So
Okay.
back before we had the collaborative and the grant, if we remember during the pandemic, we were going to try to find a part-time public health nursing because the VNA services went out.
Right.
And
Foresight.
so then when we got the public health excellence grant, part of the stipulation, and this goes for all the collaborative towns, not just Tri-Town, if you had money allocated for public health nursing, you couldn't cut it because you can't use the grant to supplant existing dollars. So the 39,5, 39,520 from like FY24 was budgeted. But now that the grant covers salaries and staffing and benefits, we use that line item to purchase our cost of vaccines for the year.
Okay.
So yes, we
So
cut
it's
it down.
not for staffing.
It's not for staffing. So
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
we did cut it down a little bit last year because we're actually bringing in additional revenue through the vaccine administration, which gives us extra revenue. But we still budget the 30,000 because that's still our cost to purchase vaccines, which they're going up and up and up and up and up. We spend a lot more than 30,000 in vaccines, but that's our commitment. Same holds true, Bob, for all the Sheffield, Sandusfield, Tyringham, Monterey, Otis. We bill them whatever their nursing old line item is still. We bring that in, and that combination of funds helps us make our pre-purchase of vaccines.
Okay,
So it's not
thanks.
staffing. Yep, absolutely. Anything else on this slide? I'm going to show you the breakdown of the three towns. So the bottom line is about 7.6%. And so got to remember a large percent of that is the fringe. Okay. So this is sort of the same line item from before, but it breaks down what the actual cost is per town. So the bottom line for Lee is 204,882. And when you see less in kind, what that means is so Lee gets a credit for their 33% of the line item for bookkeeping, because they provide the bookkeeping. They're not going to bill themselves for bookkeeping. And so, and then same thing, if you go over to the third column towards the bottom, that minus 2,357.76, that's Stockbridge's in kind for the rent. So, so there's some adjustments there. So 204,882 for Lee, 268 Lenox because we provide 43%, and 147,626 for Stockbridge. I think this is a good maintenance budget. There are any major asks in this budget other than crossing our fingers and hope for the best with fringe. Okay. Any questions on the numbers? I'm gonna keep going.
I hate to be the
No, absolutely. No,
grump here, but just running the numbers at the bottom of this form, the increase in percentage rather than dollar value is 7% for Lee, 6% for Lenox, and 4% for Stockbridge.
Yep.
And I know that the devil's in the changes within some of the light items that may vary or revenues that came in, but I'm duty bound as the Lee, one of the Lee folks to say, what the heck?
Yeah, good question. And
Yeah.
this will, the only reason why now when we craft the budget, we stick to the 33% formula, the 43% formula, 24% formula. The reason why the three are a little bit different is because of the in-kind that shoots it all over the place. Lee is getting less in-kind now because they're not getting the rent. Stockbridge is going to go down a little bit because they're getting an increase in in-kind for now they're collecting rent. I
Got
went
it.
through it, Bob. The only reason why those percentages are different because it's acting wonky now with the in-kind costs.
Okay.
Yep.
It's subtle and it's not a
No,
lot
it's
of
yeah.
money
No, it's
anyway, I'm looking for places where consistency is lacking and I just
yeah.
wanted to ask.
No,
Okay,
absolutely,
thanks.
yeah, absolutely. And I went through with a fine-tooth comb, and Zach and I spent a couple hours because historically Lee covered all the in-kind, which then we build Lenox and Stockbridge, and now I gotta add in Stockbridge, which is like a little role reversal now because now they're covering the rent and all this other stuff. So that's the only reason why the percentages are different. No one's overpaying or underpaying. It's really just Lee gets less credit for in kind, and now Stockbridge gets a little bit of a credit for the rent.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great questions. I love it.
Any other questions or additions that somebody would like to put into this?
Mm-mm.
It's our job as overseers to approve, amend, reject the budget proposed by the executive director. So if you have any questions or you have anything to amend or reject, please state it now. Otherwise, I'm going to ask to have a motion to approve the budget.
Charlie, can I just go through the rest of the presentation first?
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, I'm not done. I gotta highlight some our work. I can't ask for all this money and not explain what we do.
Well,
Um,
please continue.
but I will ask for a motion at the end, and I'll go back to the numbers if we need to. So revenues. This is our revenue sheet that Zach does a fantastic job putting together. A lot of real busy, a lot of numbers. But if you go down to the yellow, we saw a little bit of an increase in the Lee revenue, which they've always struggled to kind of get any kind of increases. And we got a little bit of an increase in Lenox, and we got a little bit of an increase in Stockbridge from FY23 to FY24. So I think it's a sign that things are really starting to pick up. I think we're seeing some growth in the towns. And with our 20% increase in the fees, we will see a significant jump this time next year. You know, they were flat for a while from the pandemic, and I think we're starting to finally bounce back. I mean, you'll see the increase from FY18 jumping. That's when we did our fee increase, and then we kind of know what happened after that. But we're around FY21. You know, we started to see a little slight bounce back, came down a little bit. The FY23, I will say, I don't know exactly why we dipped ever so slightly, but I don't know, Zach, if you agree with me, but we did have some shortages in staffing. You know, we lost an inspector, and then when we lose an inspector, we can't get sampling done. We can't get our pool samples done. We can't get our beaches done. And now that we've kind of stabilized, we're starting to go up, and we'll see a big jump next year. Yeah, when we're really high, I mean, we were at 210 before the pandemic. I expect this to go way beyond that next fiscal year. So just very quickly, some highlights. I won't read line by line to you, but on some of the things we're doing. This is our nursing program, which is really evolved vastly compared to year one. We're year 3 as a vaccine provider. We're still doing the clinics. What's fascinating to me. Look at the COVID vaccines that we gave out this fall. We're more than doubled from last year. We did 500 COVID vaccines last year, and we've already done 1,200, and we still have a couple more clinics to go. We're going to do another one or two larger clinics, which is really interesting to me. While the COVID vaccine we have to purchase, which is super expensive, the reimbursement rate, we get that back plus the administrative stuff on that. And I really surprised how high the demand was for the COVID vaccines. I would have thought we would have tapered off and we'd be in the low 200-300s. So that's really good. We've doubled our homebound vaccine in a collaborative. We're around 25-30 vaccines last year. We're working directly through the Councils on Aging and that network. And so and then recently, with the hard work of Jill and Jane, we became a certified pediatric vaccine program. And of course, Dr. Kenny, who is our medical director, he gets the luxury of overseeing the clinical program and do all our standing orders. So I thank Dr. Kenny for that. And so basically, what that means as a pediatric certified vaccine program, there's a lot of kids in the schools that the school nurses can't keep up with. So if there's like routine shots that the kids need updating, we now have a partnership to go into the schools and help administer those vaccines.
Jim, who reimburses you for the vaccines?
The insurance companies, depending on
The patient's individual insurance companies.
Yeah, it could be
Okay.
Mass Health, Medicare.
Okay.
A lot of effort went into that paperwork, but yeah, it depends. Private insurance, subsidized, but we do not charge anyone to come to our clinics. If someone comes without insurance or they forgot a vaccine card, I mean, we try really hard to try to capture that because that keeps the program sustainable, but we will not turn anybody away.
So if someone doesn't have insurance, they don't have to pay?
They can come. We will vaccinate them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. This is public health, not a
Right.
private business. It's great to get the reimbursements to keep it going, but we'll get a few here and there, and then our staff and support folks that go to these clinics, and people need help with referrals and getting to the right people to try to get insurance. We will help them. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Some leftover things here. The wildfire response. We delivered masks. We issued the air quality advisory. We're at the table. Emergency response team. Accomplishments. The household hazardous waste collection. So we are raising the fees on that. It just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The SAFE 2.0 state law is now official, meaning if the board recalls last year when we were trying to, get the salaries to a competitive place, there's been pending legislation to actually mandate all public health workers to be fully certified and licensed in addition to what we currently have. Tri-Town has never had that problem, but meaning these towns that have a part-time inspector that has no certifications or licenses, they either have to get with it or maybe join forces with other towns, but it's now a state law, which is, I finally feel like it's great for us in Massachusetts because we need qualified, certified, and competent public health workforce in the future. Just about done. The full care program, we're still working with the councils on aging, and and I do see a trend on shared services, which I think, Tri-Town is the oldest health district in the state. We're seeing a lot of interesting developments of other jurisdictions in areas of concentration starting to come together. There's a couple highlights here, and it just it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And then sort of just priorities, continued what we're doing. H5N1's a big thing we got to talk about. We are moving in a couple weeks, finally. And that's really it. So I'll go back to the budget numbers. And if there's any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I'll entertain a motion with a roll call vote if you're okay with my presentation and numbers.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. I think we all realize what a great job Jim does, and I think he is a credit to all of us, the way he's established Tri-Town as a department that should be emulated. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Nevertheless, we need to look at this objectively, and I would once again ask you to consider whether or not you want to amend or reject any aspects of the proposal or have any questions about them. And if not, I'd like to ask to have a motion to approve the proposed budget that Jim has put before us.
So moved. Second.
And any discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote then to approve it. Let's see, Jim, do you want to take?
Yeah, I just had to get off my screen share. Noel,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
Joanne,
Yes.
John,
Yes. Which
Diane,
John?
John Lidice,
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
sorry.
Diane,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Burns, Bob,
Yes.
Carissa. I need to make you. Can you unmute yourself? All right, you're all set. Sorry, I'm so sorry about that. Elias. All right, thank you.
Okay, so it's a unanimous vote to approve it. Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. Next item on the agenda is a follow-up of the green burials discussion we had before. I was hoping that Diane could continue that for us.
I don't know how you would like me to continue it. I mean, we can go off of what the minutes were. I guess Lenox Board of Health had their meeting, probably more recently than the other two towns. And we did not take any definitive votes, but we did discuss in depth, home burials being different than the public cemeteries. And as a Board of Health, we wanted to really hone in on what was considered our public cemeteries in town, not the home burials being entirely different. We did ask, and I did meet with our superintendent of the DPW and with Mary Beth Mitz and discuss that in more detail. The DPW is going to rewrite their cemetery rules and then bring it back to us. And if we're happy with that, they'll move it forward to their select board. So I guess I had left it that I thought maybe each of the towns on public cemeteries needed to do their own thing because every cemetery is different. And so maybe the wishes of the town. And for the home burials, there's a lot of state regulations that really Jim can take care of. Maybe education is the way to go with people really understanding what they're asking for or what they're looking for before we move any further.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Does anybody have any questions of Diane or anything else to add about this?
Well, if I could follow up, so at the last Tri-Town meeting, it was a really great discussion. We had someone that gave a presentation. There was a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, and this is sort of like a new area for us. So none of us are experts. And so I think the initial intent was to kind of gather what's out there because mass.gov has something on their website for green/home burials and the process to go about approval. And so, you have to submit a site assessment and all sorts of other stuff to the local board of health. The local board of health has to approve it. Then it goes to DEP and DEP has to approve it. We're talking about home burials. And so, but there's a lot of mishmash in that, like green burials, natural, home, what's the difference between the two? And so I extrapolated out what mass.gov has, because it's really hard to navigate that site as a regular citizen to really find the information. And so initially I kind of put that into a tri-town letterhead, sort of as an informational packet to give to people if they come in and inquire about a home burial. But in that kind of conversation there's a lot of stuff in there about cemeteries and home burials and all this other stuff. And so how we left it with Lenox is the Lenox Board of Health is going to advocate individually to their stakeholders in their town with respect to the cemeteries, knowing that they don't have jurisdictional control of what the cemetery does, the town does. Then what's left is like this home burial process. And so whether we take that process, put it on a letterhead, or we don't do anything, the information is still there. People can't do home burials unless they meet all sorts of informational criteria that has to go to the Board of Health anyway to be approved. And so we can, as a tri-town board and department, put together a home burial policy and just have it for informational purposes, take out all the cemetery stuff, take out all this other stuff. And then if we get a request for leave, for example, I would facilitate that as the department head to the person inquiring on a request for approval for home burial, make sure all the information is submitted, facilitate a lead Board of Health meeting, for example, let the lead Board of Health make that decision, and then keep going on that process. And so I've received one inquiry on a home burial in Lenox and nothing else. So we're sort of like, I won't say we're spinning our wheels a little bit, but like, I got to find some closure on what we need to do. And so do we want to have a policy, just a basic policy from the existing information on mass.gov, or just let things alone and just refer people to the process, and then we advocate for our own towns with the cemeteries?
Does anybody have a point to make about that?
I think seeing each town has such different rules and regulations in their cemeteries and what they would require. I think Jim's idea of just kind of letting it ride, and there are policies for home burial versus green burial, and it depends what they're asking. If they're inquiring, Jim can say, well, this is what you have to do for this. This is what you'd have to do for this. And if they want to go back to their town Board of Health and ask permission to do a green burial in a cemetery, that's really up to the cemetery, right? Because they all have different rules.
Yep.
So we really can't put anything into place for each town because they all have probably different rules in their cemeteries. So maybe we leave it that there's inquiries that Jim would take care of the inquiries and tell them the process that they need to go through. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to see the process and say, wow, that's a lot of work. Don't know if I, am interested in this anymore. So maybe Jim could just tell them what the difference is.
That's what I was thinking about for educational, that would be the part or the role we would play, and leave it go at that.
But as far as home burials are concerned, Jim said it's hard to navigate at mass.gov. So maybe we can kind of put it all together for them just to have it available.
Yeah, that's the educational part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An
That's easy.
informational paper.
Informational packet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy for us to do. That doesn't require a board vote. And folks, it's going to be the boards of health that make this decision. It's not going to be a department thing. So it'll be our job to facilitate, to make sure that the packet is complete, and then schedule a Board of Health hearing and deal with all that. And then we'll be the facilitator / administrator in each individual board. In my mind, this is an important thing. This is not like a restaurant inspection, like this is really important. And I think each board should we can help navigate that process for each board.
Jim, who would you see putting together this collation of information?
I already have it together. I just gotta kind of clean it up a little bit.
Okay, so would it seem reasonable that we would let Jim put that collation together and show it to us the next time around and see what we think about it?
Yeah, I think so.
Bob?
I would recommend that each town board individually, note it in their minutes, have it as a discussion so that, as board members turn over, et cetera, and directors eventually retire. I know I said that. I didn't really mean to suggest, but that it at least be able to, be discussed at each town with, discoverable minutes that state it will be that we have a packet, that inquiries regarding home burial will be dealt with on an ad hoc basis. And then if ever anybody needs to look back or there's a dispute, we'll at least have record in each of our towns where it belongs of our discussion. And because it really doesn't matter now, right? Because it goes to the towns. What we put in our minutes
Right.
isn't included. So that's all that I would suggest, is that it be on everybody's agenda at some point so that it's logged in and we're ready for this ad hoc packet process.
Can I ask a question?
All right, so.
Well, hold on, there's a question. Sorry.
Very
all right,
good.
all right.
This,
Question?
it's Elias. There seems to be these two avenues. One is for the green burial in the local cemetery. So each town will be responsible for working with their cemetery to come up with the rules for that cemetery. So anybody who calls from the Lenox or Stockbridge will be referred to their cemetery for those issues on green burial. That's one separate issue. On the issue of home burial, there'll be a packet of information provided by the tri-towns giving guidance to individuals who want to pursue that avenue of a home burial, but without any liability for the content of the information, because I don't want us to give information that somebody would say, well, is there a liability to what we say, versus referring to the state, which carries the responsibility for the decision making.
So yes on all that, and there's no liability.
Okay.
All we're doing is putting citations and references in what's already existing.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to make a suggestion. I think we've had a number of good suggestions here. And what I'd like to do is to propose that Jim get this consolidation of information that we would put on the Tri-Town website. And at the same time, Bob and Elias, that you might think about the wording of a motion that we'd be making at the next meeting when Jim does propose this, that would accompany it, so that we could put together a package that would then be an official Tri-Town statement and recommendation to the different boards, as well as Jim's informational post at Tri-Town. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yep.
Okay, so right then, I'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the arbovirus status update. Jim, you're going to do that, right?
Yeah, so the arbovirus season hopefully is concluded for the 2024 season. I'm not sure exactly why it's on the agenda because it's kind of past that season, but we saw a lot of information coming out, emails, DPH status updates on Tripoli, West Nile virus, knowing that our 3 towns are not part of a mosquito control program for obvious reasons. So I went back and looked at, the annual report, and there were still no Tripoli cases in Berkshire County, no West Nile virus cases in Berkshire County. There were 4 human cases of Tripoli in Massachusetts, not in this area. And there were 18 West Nile virus cases, not in this area. And so, again, we just continue to monitor that. And there's a lot of information on mass.gov on arbovirus if the boards or the community watching this meeting is interested in. And it's still the universal precautions to really protect yourself when you're out there during the mosquito season. I'm not aware of any positive cases in our jurisdiction.
Good.
Any questions or discussion?
No.
Okay, so the next item is the H5N1 updates. We discussed this earlier in the year and didn't feel that there was a significant actionable risk, although we did post some things, informational posts, and also a couple of warnings about people who took care of poultry or dairy cattle. But more recently, there's been a state of emergency declared in California related to the avian flu spreading in dairy cattle, and there have been some increased human cases. I don't know what the number is exactly, but I think it's about 40 or 50. None of which was thought to be a human-to-human contact. It's primarily poultry and dairy workers that are in close contact with these animals that have gotten the disease. And as far as I know, there aren't any fatalities, but it does seem to be a problem that isn't necessarily going away. So I would ask the board what you think our next step about this is. Any ideas?
I do have a question about the fact it's been mostly cattle. And do we have any notice to the people who have dairies in the area about what they should be looking for? Or have they already been notified by the state about this possibility?
Sorry, could you say that again, Elias? I didn't quite get that.
I was curious if the state or anybody has contacted dairy farms in the area about this possibility of what happened in California, because it was from cattle to people, not people to people. But if they've been made aware of this issue by the state or by anybody, so they could just be aware of it and watchful for it.
Jim, do you have a copy of that thing I got?
Oh, I did for
California Department of Public Health.
Excuse me, the recommendations to dairy workers particularly have been fairly stridently set forth by yes, primarily by the state in terms of its dealings directly with dairy farmers, including personal protective equipment and use of masks, gloves. The current urgency in California now comes from a case of H5N1 that was actually occurred in Louisiana, which, unlike the previous 61 cases of human H5N1 infection in the US in the last year or so, did result in severe disease. And it was someone who had her own backyard flock and handled dead birds and such as not. The interesting thing about this is that it's not quite the same strain that has been affecting the dairy cattle. This is a different strain. There has been an infection in British Columbia of one individual in British Columbia that seems to have had the same strain, but this is different from what's being seen in dairy cattle. I don't recall actually say, well, this is different from what we see in the poultry industry as well. I suspect it probably is the same. But this was the first presumed poultry to bird to human contact resulting in severe disease. There has been no evidence of human to human transmission of either the more plebeian dairy strain, and of course not in this one. There's nothing between the British Columbia and Louisiana that's of any commonality, I suppose. And although this is raised concern, a lot of the concern I think has been driven by the fact that that the genetic mutation needed in the viral strain in dairy cattle appears to have not very far to go before it can be transmitted from human to human, at least experimentally. But that has not been documented in nature yet.
One of the reasons I asked is because at Highland Farm, for instance, they do allow the public to go into the area where the babies are born, where there's cattle, where they pet the cattle, and whether that poses any kind of a risk. Probably it seems very minimal, but I was just thinking that, you know, most cattle farmers don't have the public coming onto their grounds. Highland Farm in particular has that, with children and adults going through their barns to interact with the cattle, the newborns. So I just wanted to be overly cautious about that possibility.
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly what's being done there. One of the I've lost the train of thought there. One of the things that has occurred, though, I think is some concern about transmission of the dairy strain, primarily by the transfer of cattle from an infected herd, whether it's known at the time to be infected or not, to an uninfected herd. Cattle to cattle transmission has been documented. My favorite one is that the other species can get it as well, and the cats in the barn appear to get infected with the dairy strain, but don't seem to suffer any particular bad consequences from it. But I'm rooting for the cats.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Overall, I think the risk level of people right at the present time is low, not very low, but there is recommendations that that flocks shouldn't be allowed to free range. They should be in an enclosed area, and preferably with some kind of netting or something that would prevent other birds from coming to visit with them.
Yes.
So
now, with respect to the dairy cattle, there are a number of states that have regulations that prohibit the importation of cows from places where there was known disease. But apparently Massachusetts doesn't have that specific interdiction. They have a general examination, testing, and some clearing system, but not something specifically directed at the H5N1 so far.
Yeah.
Now, I'm having a conference tomorrow with a Dr. Badelia, who is the director of the BU Center for Emerging Infectious Diseases. And she's been involved in a lot of discussions about this particular thing. And I'm hoping to get from her some information that we might use in terms of formulating some sort of actionable strategy here. I'm also been in touch with our newly elected rep, Lee Davis. She's expressed a commitment to putting together whatever legislation might be necessary to prevent something from happening in Massachusetts, like what has happened in California. And so I'm wondering where you think we should take this at this point, and what our next step should be.
My first step would be to find out what actually is going on in terms of the agriculture folks and how they are interacting with dairy farmers and keepers of large flocks. What kind of laws, or not laws, but recommendations at least, that they have in place? Do they have any enforcement? Because that is the source. And so I would like to know what is actually happening in Massachusetts on the ground. I don't feel I'm in a position to march over to Highland Farms and ask them directly what they are doing. My hunch is that given the immense investment that they have in their retail sales, that they're probably pretty squeaky clean, but I don't know.
No, so I just went on the mass.gov site, so I'll read this from my phone. I can't do it quickly enough to screen share. So it says in August 2024, Massachusetts became the first state to test all of its dairy herds for the virus, and all 95 samples tested negative. The testing was conducted by Department of MDAR, in collaboration with the Mass Department of Public Health and the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard University. I never got that memo, but it's on mass.gov.
Yeah, see, this is where it's not just what we can do to spur things along in a particular direction, but it's what we need to understand before we go raising red flags. I'm a big believer in the bugs are going to always win. So eventually this will come back to bite us, I'm sure. Either that or it will just die out. By the way, worldwide, there have been several hundred cases of H5N1 with more serious consequences than we're seeing with the virus here. So it's certainly possible that it can become more virulent. Sounds redundant, doesn't it?
Bob, did you have a question? I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry.
Well, not really a question, a potential suggestion. The question came out to us, how do we want to handle it? I think Charlie asked that. I would suggest something along the lines that we take this seriously, that we remain surveillant of data reported through our national and statewide entities, and that we keep it on our agenda, on the Tri-Town agenda. Further activity like restricting visiting at Highland Farm or I don't think there's enough either risk or information to dramatically, other than reporting dead birds or sick cows, which is already in place from the Department of Public Health and the agricultural end. I was just on their site and they've got a pretty long and attentive section on this. But anyway, that we take it seriously, remain surveillant of national and state reports and suggestions, regulations, etc., and keep it on our agenda for our quarterly meetings.
Yeah, I agree. It is something that is clearly an emerging disease. We need to know what's happening.
I think it would be
Yeah.
nice if the Department of Agriculture, because they seem to be following this up throughout the state, would they contact Tri-Town if they see something? Who will they contact? Who's the point of contact if they see something? Because if Jim didn't get the first notice they were around, how will we get the second notice if something is discovered?
Well, I will say if H5N1 is a reportable disease, our nurse program will get it through the Maven system. That's
Right.
automatic, but that's obviously human cases.
Yeah.
If a cow is tested for it, that doesn't obviously go into the Maven surveillance system. But I would I will follow up with Department of Ag and DPH because I'm curious as well.
They seem to be on top of it, so let them do their work. We don't have to do anything unless they give us a report.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so we'll keep this on the agenda and we'll be surveillant, and I'll be doing a little homework myself too with Dr. Bedelia, and we'll report back at the next meeting about it. let's see now, what's our, any other additions about that, or can I move on to the next agenda item?
You move on.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to do a follow-up of the recent GE UDF transportation plan. I'll start that out. The GE remediation program for the Housatonic River required a proposal for a transportation and disposal plan that we saw last year in October. And subsequently, we invited the local Region 1 representatives to one of our meetings. And we made several points to them. There was public discussion and other things, including petition asking to have the numbers of trucks going through the towns reduced. GE has recently, this past October now, offered up a reiteration of the transportation disposal plan. And in this plan, we have about a 70+% reduction in the truck traffic through the towns, which is a significant response to what was brought before them, the region last year. So I think that's a positive aspect of this. There is still in my mind, there's still a concern because this project is still planned to go for 13 to 17 years. What I'm concerned about with that is it appears to me from looking at it that the region that the reaches of the river, each of the areas of the river that will be remediated are going to be, for the most part, remediated sequentially. They'll go from one area to the other. In a number of places through the country where they've had Superfund projects and remediation programs like this, they've done the hydraulic dredging in particular, which is one of the newer aspects of this plan, concurrently in multiple reaches. And of course, if you're going to do a reach like the area north of Woods Pond and take 3 years to do it, and then you're going to do the Woods Pond area, or let's say vice versa, you do the Woods Pond and that takes 3 years, and then you do the area around it and that takes another 3 years. That 6-year project is part of this whole 13 to 17 year period. Whereas if these two areas were done concurrently, we would cut that time for that those two projects in half. And I've actually asked the region about this, and I don't have the responses yet. But what I was hoping is that we might have a little bit of some opinions about whether or not the rest of you think that the time frame, which the region has said, the longer this is delayed, the greater the risk. If the time frame that the GE company is proposing ought to be shortened up if possible, and that's the idea. If possible, I'd like to make it clear to the region myself that GE, for example, last year did not investigate things thoroughly, and that's why the region said that their specifically, quote, that their proposal was inadequate. This year, they've incorporated rail into their proposal, which they hadn't done before, even though they were directed to do that. And I think that the 17-year proposal that GE is making is solely because they are not, they have a limited throughput at the UDF, and they can't do it any faster with the UDF that they're stuck with. And that's my opinion. I don't have the information back on that, but I do think there's enough reason to be skeptical of this 17-year period that I'd like to hear anybody's opinion about whether we should do something as a group to inquire further about this or what.
Charlie,
Um,
is the public comment still open for the most recent plan? What's the
Yes,
what's the
this
deadline
plan-
for that?
Yeah, this plan has a public comment period that'll end January the 15th. And I think that there's plenty of time for anybody who has an interest in this to provide any kind of public input. And I realize it's a complex discussion. I don't expect anybody to really give a definitive input at this point, but I just was hoping maybe I would put something in your minds to think about this, considering the fact that we do have an opportunity to provide input, number one, and number two, I think that last year when we did provide input, there was a response and a change.
So if I understand what you said, you're one of your concerns is that the fact that the UDF is sitting there, that this might become a rate limiting step in terms of processing the material that's removed. And
Yeah, I'll be more specific about that. The bulk of the remediation waste is going to come from Woods Pond, which is called Reach 6. And the area, the backwaters above it, slightly to the north, upstream from it, called Reach 5C. That constitutes about 85% of the waste that's going to be excavated. And it will be all excavated, or almost all of it, hydraulically. In other words, they'll put something like a boat on top of the water, and then they have a pipe that they stick down with a rotating cutter, and they have pumps, and they suck the sediment from the bottom of the pond or the backwater, and it goes along in pipes. It can go for miles with auxiliary pumps helping it along until it gets to a place where it's deposited, and then it has to be what's called dewatered. Sediment is typically accompanied with the slurry that they bring in the pipes is about 85% water. And what they do is there are various techniques, but one technique that they use, they put it into a big column, sort of like a silo or something like that. Some of these spin, and there are other ways to do it, but the water then is removed from the sediment, which goes down to the bottom of the silo, and then that gets filtered out, and they will sometimes squeeze it to get it even more water out. And it's eventually put into about 15% of what was originally present by volume, and that's the sediment. They call it cakes, and they can put that into vehicles, cans or containers that are something like the back of a tractor trailer truck, holding maybe 21 tons of the solid stuff. And that stuff can either be carried by a truck or it can be carried by a train to various places. Now, if the material is going to be deposited in the UDF, it has to be below the 50 parts per million concentration that is allowable there. And if it can be deposited there, then what the current setup is, as I understand it all, there will be a new presentation January the 15th by GE. The current one, as I understand it, is that they will suck all of this material to a pumping station just above the water line north of the UDF, and then pump it uphill into the UDF so it can be dewatered there, and the sediment, the dry sediment, then placed into the UDF. The water that's extracted during the dewatering process has to be treated, generally speaking, if it has any contamination of it, before it can be returned to the river or the groundwater. That will also be done at the UDF. Now, the physical footprint for the dewatering operation and the water treatment operation and all of this processing of the sediment that goes is considerable. And it is a limiting factor in the processing of this material very frequently. So when you look at when I look at it, I'm not an expert. And I have posed this question to the EPA, and I don't have the answer back yet, but it seems to me that this whole system seems to be set up with a bottleneck of the ability of the physical footprint of the UDF to receive the material and dewater it and process it in order to keep it in the UDF. And this constraint is put there because of the assumption that GE has that all of this material must go to the UDF. But there's nothing in any of these documents, the 2020 final permit, the 2020 settlement agreement, the 2016 final permit that wasn't amended by those first two, that says that all of it must go to the UDF. It has documented there's quite a bit of characterization of the material that can go there. But the only mandate that's present in these documents is one that says that GE should maximize the amount of waste that is transported off-site, out of county, by rail. That's the only mandate. There's no corollary mandate that says that GE should maximize the amount going to the UDF. So the problem here is that the alternative here is to put auxiliary dewatering sites, and I've identified what I think are two sites for this, and in which case the material would have to be taken out of county by rail because the UDF would not be able to accept it because of its volume. If my suspicion is correct about this. So this is basically the situation that we're in right now with respect to this update. I don't have the definitive thing to tell you yet, but I'd like to try to give you as accurate an update as I can. GE will be presenting a more detailed presentation about wood spawn on January the 15th. Unfortunately, that's when the public comment ends, which is always somewhat paradoxical about these things, is that you get a chance to comment before you know what's going to really be said. But so this is the situation as I see it. I see we have an inordinately long period of time that's driven by an assumption that all the material has to go to the UDF by GE, which has been tacitly accepted by almost everybody, but I don't see that it's the case at all. And secondly, we have this unstated bottleneck. Now, if I proposed it to the region that they consider doubling or tripling the amount of hydraulic dredging machines they have so they can triple the amount going to the UDF. And I'm waiting for their response to that, but I doubt very much that they're going to actually be able to tell me that they're going to do that because I don't think the UDF can handle it.
That's a good point. Seems to me, I remember when they were doing the Pittsfield stretches, they had a dewatering plant right at Fred Garner, where Fred Garner Park is now on Pomeroy Avenue, subsequently dismantled. And it certainly might be a nice prototype for multiple similar sites when we're able to generate the enthusiasm for a more rapid response. Yeah.
Well, GE dismissed, for example, they looked at, they did have acknowledged that rail can be used in a couple of places, whereas last year they said it couldn't be used anywhere.
Yeah.
But we now have rail being used entirely down in Housatonic, and we have rail staging to be used in Lenoxdale, and also up near the industrial park in Pittsfield. They rejected the Columbia Mill site, which is south of Woods Pond, because it's a 48-acre property. They rejected it because they said there wasn't enough space there, but of course there are a lot of buildings on that site. I spoke to the owners of the Columbia Mill site. That's a Spertus Worldwide Demolition Company. They say they'd be very happy to demolish the buildings. They say it's very easy to do pretty quickly, and they'd love to have permanent rail staging there. They'd look forward to having a permanent relationship with the railroad. And they've given me a written statement to that effect. In addition, the Housatonic Railroad officials tell me that if those buildings were demolished, there would be plenty of room for rail staging, which is what GE said wasn't possible. They say there'll be plenty of room there for it, and they would look forward to having a permanent presence there because they can see some use for that rail staging in the future too. So this is another example of GE, just sort of doing a summary dismissal of a place without really getting involved and looking at it in a way that would be helpful, because they have this, and this is my opinion, that they have an agenda to put everything in the dump that overrides the risk to the communities of delaying what they're doing just because of their agenda. And I'm not happy with that.
Charlie, Mary Beth had a question.
It's not really a question. I'm going to try to make a comment on my understanding of what's going on with the cleanup. From the documents that I've read, it looks like they've done core sampling of the highest concentrations of contamination in the river. And so they're planning on taking 100,000 cubic yards of the highest concentration, which is, those areas that are exceeding 50 parts per million, and dewatering those and then taking that out of state. And that is where the rail lines will come in to particular use. So in looking at reaches 5C, 6, and whatever's, a little farther down the river in Lee, those are supposed to be the most highly concentrated areas that have these pockets of 50 parts per million. So my understanding is that's why those are the areas that the rail lines or the spurs are being put in. And then the stuff will be taken to a federal licensed toxic waste facility, and the municipal waste that is left locally will be hydraulically pumped to a dewatering area closer to the upland disposal facility, dewatered. The leachate will be treated before it's released or taken away. I would assume potentially the way waste is taken away in a sewage truck, bad water. Those soils that are left that are at 25 parts per or below 50 parts per million, around 25 parts per million, would be put into the UDF. That's my civilian understanding of what's going to happen. And the reason that they're doing it over a 13-year period is because they need to do it in reaches going sequentially down the river, because they anticipate, when they start to dredge this stuff up, some of the dirt is going to naturally just kind of come up and will probably be filtering down the river. And so by cleaning sections of the river, they'll get everything as they're moving south. And that's my understanding of the situation, which is why it will take 13 years.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you brought that up, because I've heard that understanding from quite a number of people. And having studied this intensely, I don't think it's correct. But I don't blame you for it, because it's a huge amount of information. And frankly, it takes quite a bit of study in order to understand some of the, I would call it prestidigitation that GE is going through with this. But last year, for example, just to put things in perspective, last year with GE's proposal, they said there were no trains to be used. Now, the 2016 final permit and the 2020 final permit both insisted that GE consider all those to look at the possible ways to maximize the off-site, out-of-county transport of material by rail. They summarily dismissed all of the places. Now, it wasn't until we gave them, and partly through this board, pushback and told them that they were not doing a good job looking at this, that they came back And now they're using a rail in the places that you're
Mhm.
supposed. They're not using the rail there because that's the highest concentration thing. They're using the rail there now because we told them they better start to look at rail better. That's
I
the only
can-
reason they're using it. They didn't use it last year. They didn't care to use it, and they tried to get away with not using it. Now this year, they're doing the same thing again, and I'll be very happy to go over this with detail. It's too much detail now, but they're going over the same thing all over again, but they're doing it slightly differently. Yes, they're using some rail now, but I would not be appeased by this at all. They're making the same kind of inadequate representation about what they're doing with the same kind of chicanery that they've always done. And I would really look forward to bringing this to you in great detail so you can understand what I'm talking about.
Sure, and I
But I
concur.
really do appreciate what you said, because this is what everybody thinks. They've given them all of these chapter headlines to understand there's so much information that you go along from one chapter line to the other, and that's what you think is supposed to be done. But it isn't. It isn't. They are really not doing a good job. And we are being pushed into a situation. Now, this is my opinion, but I've done a lot of homework on this. Okay. And last year we called them to task, and I give the region credit for listening to us and actually turning them around so that this year we do have the rail going. And that's a very important thing, but they still need to do a better job this year. Just because they did a good job changing those things, I think they've made a big mistake now. And at any rate, it's very complex, but I do appreciate what you said, because what you said is exactly what most caring people who really are concerned about this think, because there's so much information in this that it's impossible for almost anybody to get the information to the point of view that they can be as legitimately skeptical as I am.
I appreciate what you said, Charlie, and as someone who has been reading this stuff and has participated in writing responses back to GE as a Town of Lenox Select Board member, we were hammering them to look at rail and hammering them.
You
to
guys
look
did a
at
great
hydraulic
job. You
pumping.
guys did a great job. It was a team effort for Berkshire County to do this. Right?
Yeah,
And
so, you know,
how we
nobody,
changed them from last year. And
Right,
it was Lenox brought up the hydraulic dredging. You guys and your engineers pushed that. All I'm going to tell you is that we need to push them more, because they're still dropping the ball.
well, you know,
I-
all I can say is you and I didn't do this to the county.
I don't think
You and I are trying to clean this up, and everybody
Of course we
here,
are. Right.
you know,
Anyway, Bob,
so,
I'm sorry, Mary Beth. Bob has it.
yeah, go right ahead, Bob.
Charlie, what part of what Mary Beth said is in error?
Well,
With it as
first of
quickly
all,
as you can.
Okay, she said, first of all, that they're putting the rail where they are to do the high concentration stuff, but that's not it. They're putting the rail in the places that are easiest for them to put the rail. Okay.
Of course,
They're
they need.
probably dredging the stuff. They can do that almost anywhere. But for example, Rising Pond, they don't have the highest concentration stuff down there, but they're putting
Right.
all the rail down there to do it. And they're taking 100% of the stuff out of Rising Pond by rail, simply because that's easy for them to do.
Right. Well, Mary Beth is not far off. I mean, I've too, Lee has a distinct committee separate from the Board of Health that's been immersed in this almost weekly and with an awful lot of effort. The a committee that's been formed through the select people. And so I mean, I too, the only I really don't see what there's not a big difference. They're using rail to their advantage when they can and where they can. There are real logistical efforts. I'm guessing, tell me if I'm correct, that your point, Charlie, is that given their error with regard to rail utilization, that same error may be being made with regard to the time frame. And
I don't want to draw that kind of loose extrapolation. What I'm going to say is much more specific. The first of all, the concept of going from the top down to the bottom. I understand that idea, you know, and Dean Taliaferro has mentioned that you start upstream and you go downstream. But in fact, when you look at how does this stuff migrate, you know, they are going to have what they call performance standards monitors. They'll have performance. In other words, if you're starting up high, they're going to be monitoring the flow and the PCB concentrations. They're going to be able to look to see where how much is coming from a particular operation. If it's exceeding this, then presumably they would stop and make some kind of corrective change. Now the stuff moving down from that stuff upstream, for the most part, is going to, if it's a high water event like a flood or something that occurs during the process, just going to go over the dams anywhere. It's not going to settle in any of the impoundments. The bulk of the material comes from Woods Pond and 5C. It doesn't come from 5A, B above. And so the real idea here is to get in and get that stuff out as soon as possible. If rising pond downstream is going to be done later, fine, after that. But the bulk of the material comes from that spot. And if the rising pond, if the Woods Pond excavation is going to take 3 years, and the backwater thing is going to take 3 years, and it's being done with a certain amount of hydraulic dredging equipment, which, as far as I can tell, when I look at the amount of waste that's being taken out and the average per day, assuming they're going to not be working all winter and all this stuff, it seems to me to be the amount of volume of material per day that a given hydraulic dredge would excavate. So first of all, I would propose that they should excavate Woods Pond with twice as much or 3 times as many dredges to make it go faster. Why not?
Okay. So,
GE has delayed us a year, and because they did an inadequate presentation last year. So first of all, let's do it 3 times that. The problem is going to be, I predict, that the UDF is not going to be able to handle that accelerated hydraulic dredging. And I think it's not going to be able to handle it because it just doesn't have the footprint to handle that. Now, Columbia Mill downstream they're planning to later on hydraulically dredge the material from Columbia Dam and send it upstream all the way to the UDF. What I'm proposing is if they can't double or triple the hydraulic dredging in Woods Pond right away, then set up an auxiliary site down at Columbia Mill. GE dismissed Columbia Mill as not being an adequate rail staging site, just like they did last year. But I talked to the owners of the property. They'll demolish everything there. They got 48 acres. I talked to the Housatonic Railroad authorities. They say that they can put in rail staging there if the buildings are demolished. And both companies are very interested in working together in a permanent way. So they'd love to do this kind of stuff, and they're very willing to help do this. So you could hydraulically dredge from Woods Pond down to Columbia Mill and dewater it there and speed up the process.
Okay, so you're arguing that there are improvements in their logistical plan and that there's deception and some chicanery, as you said, with regard to who said what.
The deception. I'm not arguing about the deception and chicanery. I'm just saying
Well,
that
you mentioned that.
Their goal is not stated. Okay, that's what I'm saying. It's their goal is simply to put everything in the UDF, and they want to do it,
Right.
and that's what they want to do. And the UDF has certain constraints. And I'm saying that it's in the public's best interest to get this stuff out as soon as possible, and consequently, and there is nothing. And see, I don't want to disturb these.
Why, Charlie, are you saying, what evidence do we have to suggest that getting it out of there as soon as possible is better? It's been there since 1972.
This is what the region has been telling us all the time, that delay is in danger to the communities below, because you're going to get downstream migration of all this stuff. And obviously, if they're telling me this, I'm going to go for it. And this is what they've been telling us all along, that we need not to delay. It's been one of their primary statements all the time, that you have to get this out sooner, otherwise it's continuing the risk. So that to first of all, not take the simple step that GE should have to ask the Columbia Mill people would they demolish the buildings, or ask Housatonic Railroad if they could put up staging unit. Both of those companies said they can do it. The GE knocked it off. That could be a dewatering site. That could have the time that it would take to put the stuff from Woods Pond out. And meanwhile, we'd take it out and and take it out by rail.
I
So
would
Charlie,
suggest,
what do you
you know,
propose? Go ahead, Bob.
I would suggest that instead of pushing for this new, somewhat smaller step of let's look at the Columbia Mill, let's push for remediation in place. Let's push for let's push for making GE assume the economies that would result in no UDF or no new PCB laden site in Lee. I would be I would not want to get involved with this kind of like trying to negotiate their logistics based on the fact that they haven't adequately looked at the Columbia Mill site. I mean, I would feel strongly about that. I think that they have been that obtuse and not forthcoming about several of the potential in place remediations. And at the same time, we're looking at only removing 20% of the PCBs. That number has come down from 50 to 60 when some of this project oriented detail was provided. Now it's 20%, and no one at GE or the EPA is denying that. So you're talking about leaving, Charlie, 80% of the stuff at Woods Pond. What about that? I mean, to me, that means, and so do we have data that removing 20% is going to potentially help public health? I mean, I think this is maybe not the forum to talk this over. We don't have enough information. There's a lot going on in this area. And I think the work you've done is excellent. You've been a good detective but it doesn't overlap with my read. And this is not the Lee board. This is these have been my personal impressions, but there's a lot going on. It's highly complicated. We don't know what's safer for the public or not. There's no data. Just because they've been telling us it's got to get out there as soon as possible. They're all in bed together. The same groups working together told us no rail. The same groups are telling us no volatile material is evident, but we know now that it is. So there's lots of this inconsistency and inaccuracy on all of their parts, such that I don't believe them when I wouldn't go to town on saying it's got to get out of there as soon as possible. I mean, I think that from the perspective of a Lee board and a Lee citizen, there are way better ways to do this. And micromanaging where the dewatering plant is or how fast it is has to take into consideration the sloppiness of the excess speed that's applied, the extra logistics that are involved, the difficulty with just the number of inspectors and testing. All of this needs to be weighed in a algorithmic approach with risk involved, but we don't have that data. So I don't mean to go on and on, but this is a heated issue for us. And Lee is taking the brunt of it. And I am not going to agree with advocating for the Columbia Mill to be yet another PCB laden site. I can't do that.
Okay, so I agree with you about all of those things you said about including the fact that, science describes a certain set of risks at one time and learns that they were wrong later on, and the whole thing becomes a charade, what was going on in the first place. But what I'm working with are the constraints of the agreements, the 2016 permit, the 2020 settlement agreement, and the 2020 final permit. Now, what I'm proposing is totally within those constraints, so that in the 2020 settlement agreement, GE agreed not to have any legal recourse if everything was contained within the structure of these legal agreements. Now, if the bulk of the sediment from Woods Pond and 5C can be removed by concurrent dewatering and sediment treatment operations at Columbia Mill and maybe north of the Housatonic Railroad Museum and a place a little north of there, we could decrease the bulk of the material going to the dump by 2/3, almost, if each of these places were in operation at the same time. I believe that a dump of that smaller size is not economically attractive to GE. And I'm hoping, and I'm working on the idea that perhaps if that kind of smaller dump could be put into place, because we worked within the constraints that are available, as seemingly illogical as it might be in the greater picture to do that. But if we worked within those constraints and got these things done in a faster way, because we're accepting the fact that getting rid of this faster is, as the EPA says it is, the better thing and will lessen a risk. Then, in so doing, we secondarily decrease the size of the dump. We may be able to find that in the greater picture, GE realizes that the negative advertising potential of having this in Berkshire County and the diminished economic advantage of having a smaller dump in perpetuum in this town is not going to be worth it. And hopefully we might be able to have people coming from other points of view to encourage GE to realize that this was a big mistake to do this. And that's my goal.
All right. Any other comments or questions?
Well, we need to have public comment period. I'm sorry. Are there any other remarks about the UDF transportation plan update? We have citizen speak time. Jim?
We have Leslie and Mary Beth as citizens. If they have any questions or want to speak on any other topic. Leslie, did you have anything to add for citizen speak time? You're just covering the meeting.
Yes, I'm covering the meeting, but will you be posting those slides, or can I access them?
The slides for the
Budget.
green burials. Oh, this
The budget slides.
I can send them to you. I can send them to you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, I think we're set with citizen speak time.
Okay, I thank everybody for their citizen input. Do we have we don't have anything else on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I'll
Second?
that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, have a good holiday, you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.